Hello friends. Today I would like to share a fan fiction story I came across 2 years ago called Hope Deferred. It serves as an epilogue to The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis and follows Susan Pevensey's grieving journey. In this story, she learns to make peace with the past and heal through the promise of Aslan's presence. Hope Deferred by Broken Kestral. You can follow along with the link below if you like. Hope Deferred. Proverbs 13:12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled makes a tree of life. 6 years. 6 years after the crash, a beautiful pale woman stepped off a train and onto the platform of a quiet country station. No one was there to meet her. She'd hesitated to take the train. Even after 6 years, the creaks and groans along the rail made her flinch with remembered pain, though not with fear. But she had other memories of trains, of 4 children sent away from London during the war because of the air raids, and a train ride where she traded glances with an older brother as the younger sulked, bored, and her youngest sister bravely blinked away tears during the first half hour and looked out of a window. Susan had taken her younger sister's place at the window this time, blinking back her own tears. The countryside was changed, smaller, and with a few more houses and fewer stone ledges. The ride was disappointing, long and hard, much the way everything was now. But this time was different as well. This time she knew what she was going towards, what she had hardly dared to hope for, but what she could not keep herself from hoping for nonetheless. And now, in the middle of a morning, she had arrived at the first step, the platform where she and her siblings had first arrived when going to the professor's. She could almost see their spirits, small suitcases in hand, standing bewildered as they looked for someone to fetch them. They had been so young. Susan closed her eyes against the spirits, shook herself, and held her head up as she descended the platform. She was not worried about getting a ride. The professor's old home was still a landmark, and all the townspeople would know it. She was sure she'd have no problem with her request to view the house. But first, to get there. "Excuse me," she said in her clear voice to one of the men sitting in a horse-drawn wagon, talking with the station master. "Would you be able to take me to the old house mentioned in the histories and guidebooks where an old professor named Diggory Kirk once lived?" The men looked at her and then glanced at each other, in one of those glances that define who was an outsider and who was no. "Tough of some sort, no doubt," said the man in the wagon. "I here for the old house," said the station master. "How about it?" "Right, I can take you, miss," said the man in the wagon to Susan. "My name is Jeremy. If you hop aboard, we'll be off." Despite his words, he was already standing and extending a hand to the younger woman. Susan, after all those years, again walked and spoke and watched with the queenly grace that had once defined her, and many felt compelled to help her with what courtesy their hearts could hold. She had learned not to compare their rough efforts with the joyous refinement of Narnia, knowing they offered only what they could, and the courtesy of the offer was a well-meant gift. And she might not have to ache for the old courtesy much longer. For both these reasons, she willingly took Jeremy's hand and allowed him to pull her up onto the wooden wagon seat. "Thank you," she said, folding her hands in her lap. Through the rough, jolting ride, she maintained her silence, and Jeremy was content to let her, though he stole glances at her occasionally, perhaps seeing more than her upright stance, which implied more grace than constraint. Perhaps he saw her pale face lined with a pain that had never ceased, and the heart-piercing look of beauty so sorrowful. Susan was seeing ghosts again. She heard her young voice telling Edmund not to push, Peter warning Lucy away from the edge, and even heard the rustling of the suitcases rubbing against each other. She had been so worried during that trip that the patches holding in their few items would give way. Such silly fears she once had. But fear had too often found a listener in her. She was tired of ghosts. She ached, oh, how she ached with all the remaining depth of her wounded heart for real things again. Closer, closer. Yes, this was the drive they had walked over and over, recalling the things of Narnia through the rest of the summer. Professor Kirk had come with them, to the amusement of his staff, and his wisdom had eased their path to being children again, to being English again. 2 of the trees were gone, and Susan supposed they improved the view, but she still wished with all the desire of a child for the familiar that they had still been in place. She had the desires of a child again. She fought them for so long, she did not fight them now. Perhaps only children could enter into Narnia. Aslan had told her she was too old. But if she had the heart of a child again, would it work? Jeremy glanced at her again as her breath quickened, and perhaps the sorrow breaking through her demeanor spoke, for he cleared his throat as they stopped at the door. Will you be needing a ride back, miss? Would she? She did not know. She hoped, oh, Aslan, how she had hoped, but she would not. But it was all too likely she would. They had, after all, always come back. I do not know, she answered, for she was always truthful. Right, miss, I can wait for a bit. Today's me day off. Be kind of you to send someone out, though, if you're staying. Susan took his hand gracefully and stepped down, released it, and turned back and looked at him. It is very kind of you to offer, Jeremy, and I thank you very much for it. As soon as I know myself, I will certainly ask them to pass the message on. She turned quickly, for kindness could be upsetting, she learned, when she was hurting, and this visit with hope in the past so intertwined hurt terribly. Yes, there were steps up to the house. Surely the new owner would have known the worth of the house and would let her. There was only one way to know. Susan raised her hand and knocked firmly. A maid answered it. Susan's hands trembled. A maid, costumed much as Ivy, Margaret, and Betty had been, answering with that helpful, inquiring look of maids everywhere. Excuse me, my name is Susan Pemsey, and I wish to see the house, if it is convenient for those who live here. She stepped inside after the maid and unpinned her hat. Then she handed it to the maid's outstretched hand and thanked her when the maid spoke of getting the housekeeper, Mrs. Richards. The maid left, and Susan pressed her hands to her eyes. She would not cry. She wouldn't. She knew this room, knew it, and the memories, the dust and polished smell. The picture above the fireplace of a stuffy-looking knighted man. The sunlight falling on the rug. She knew this place.